Welcome to the World Language Essential Standards K-12 Program Showcase webinar. These webinars, and this part of the series, is designed to spotlight a particular program. In this case, it's K-12 Classical Languages. All K-20 World Language administrators, teachers, and instructors are welcome at these broadcasts. And this particular series with the K-12 Program Showcase is designed to be, if you will, a virtual school site visit. So you'll learn not only about the particular K-12 program area that we're talking about, classical languages, but also you'll get to hear from various districts and organizations that offer classical language programs and what they've done to build, maintain, and expand their offerings to students K-12. Today's agenda is coming up on your screen. As you can see, we're going to start with a welcome and overview. We're going to talk very specifically about our World Language Essential Standards and what they say about our K-12 classical language programs, as well as some resources that are available with the standards to go for classical language programs. And then we'll have a focus on 3 different groups. First will be Guilford County Schools that has a K-12 classical language program. Then will be the North Carolina Virtual Public School, or NCvps, to talk about their online Latin programs. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about professional organizations for classical language educators. We'll wrap up with reminders and take any final questions, although I would encourage you to put your questions in the question box when you have them. Let's begin with a quick poll and time to check the question box just in case we have any questions. What are your goals with today's webinar? And you can check all that apply here. Are you a teacher leader sharing information with colleagues? Are you an administrator gathering materials for local presentations? Are you an educator earning a contact hour for licensure renewal? Are you an individual getting a question answered? Or do you want to remain anonymous on a Wednesday afternoon? What I'll do is go ahead and start the poll. That will allow you to click on your answers on the screen, and then we'll come back in just a few moments and talk about the results together. Let's go ahead and finish up voting in the next 10 seconds. All right, thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and close our poll and then share the results with you. It looks like everybody's got a reason, and sometimes multiple reasons to be here. The most popular reason to be here is that you're an educator earning a contact hour for licensure renewals. Contact hours to accumulate for a CEU can be earned by those who participate in the live broadcast of webinars in the World Language Webinar Series. Today's webinar is 1 hour long, so 1 contact hour or 0.1 CEUs can be earned. Please save the email receipt you receive from the GoToWebinar system to document this contact hour towards a CEU for licensure renewal. There will also be a link that you can download a certificate. This is a content activity for world languages. Please note that local districts or charter schools must approve professional development offerings. In addition, a recording is being made of today's webinar, and the archive, including these slides, will be available for local training approximately 1 week from today. These materials can be used as professional development resources locally with contact hours documented by the district or school. So that's the thing about licensure renewal. I also see that a number of you are here because you're teacher leaders sharing information with colleagues. It's always good to take advantage of these opportunities to get information to share locally, either with your district or your school or your department. I also see there's some folks who want to remain anonymous, and we also have individuals getting a question answered and an administrator gathering materials for local presentations. Welcome one and all, and we'll go ahead and continue with our broadcast. All right, let's begin. Within our World Language Essential Standards, our state standards for all world language programs, we have K-12 classical language programs. Classical language programs involve the study of Latin and ancient Greek, as well as other languages that are no longer a native or first language for any population. Do be careful. I have been told, of course, that these are not dead languages, they are immortal languages. And so they live on, and these languages are accessible to 21st century students through literature, and they do have a significant impact on learning in other disciplines, things like modern languages, art, law, government, medicine, and so on. The primary focus in classical language learning is the development of interpretive reading skills. Interpretive listening, as well as presentational speaking and writing, are ancillary skills that support language learning. These modalities are of particular value for students with different learning styles and of various ages. Within our state standards, there is a focus, as you can see, on the proficiency expectations on interpretive reading. It is always a teacher or program choice to include oral or spoken components of classical languages. That's a local decision, and our standards are set up so that you can do whatever is right for your program. As I was saying, since the focus of classical languages is on the written and not the spoken word, the following differences appear in the way the exit proficiency expectations are written, and you see that in the chart there. Classic students spend little time on presentational speaking beyond the novice level. While it is important that students appreciate the fact that classical languages were once used to communicate orally, there's little point in becoming proficient in speaking a classical language because these languages are not used in that fashion. There's also an increased use of oral techniques that appear in the intermediate levels in the study of poetry and oratory, where sound adds to the meaning of the literature. Since the primary focus is interpretive reading, students progress more quickly in their reading skills, and if they continue to study the language, they will be able to read original authors such as Caesar, Virgil, Ovid, Catullus, and others. And the information I've just been reading to you, by the way, is also in our notes in this slide, but it's also specifically from our state standards. So there is additional information and details related to classical languages and the structure of those programs that may be of interest to you. On this next slide, we have an overview of our K-12 classical language programs within our state standards. This version of our state standards, which went into effect starting in the fall of 2012, was the first set that had K-12 for classical languages. Prior to that, our state standards had included usually just secondary level classical language study, and sometimes it was specific to Latin. So it was a real advance to have a K-12 sequence available for all classical languages, and to expand from just Latin, but to include all classical languages such as ancient Greek or Sanskrit that might be taught in the classical way, and to also involve the study of the classics in general and civilizations as part of that work. You can see at the elementary level, you can have a classical language program that's called WLES, Foreign Language in the Elementary School, and this is where you're meeting and studying the language 90 minutes a week or more. So this might be daily instruction in language at the elementary level. It might be 3 different sessions a week of 30 minutes each. But in order to build proficiency in any language, research shows that you have to have 90 minutes of instruction or more per week at the elementary level. When instruction falls below that level, it's considered an exploratory class. And exploratory classes in any language or program do not build proficiency in language, but instead introduce the students to the language, usually some vocabulary and so forth, as well as introduce some of the culture that students might be interested in. So that's our elementary offerings in classical language programs. At the middle school level, we do still have the exploratory, and again, this is often a chance for students to begin to think about different languages they could study in a more formal way. And particularly at the middle school level, you'll see schedules include something like exploratory in a wheel schedule, or some other name for that, where students are rotating through a series of courses so that they can make decisions about what they want to take when they reach the high school. There's also the equivalent of WLES programs at the middle school. That's either beginning study or continuing study. And this is where, again, you're meeting 90 minutes a week or more, sometimes daily, for language instruction. And either you're beginning that, students have never had it before, or they're continuing it in a course because they've already had exposure to the language at the elementary level. Since 2007, North Carolina also offers the opportunity for middle school students to earn high school credit. And so levels 1, 2, and 3 of classical languages, either Latin or ancient Greek or others, can be taken for high school credit. And these appear on a student's transcripts as they enter the high school and continue their language study. At the high school level, for classical languages, we have levels 1 through 6. Levels 1 and 2 at the high school are always offered at the standard level, and levels 3 through 6 are always at the honors level. This has to do with our inherently advanced State Board of Education policy that states that any level 3 world language course or higher is inherently honors and always receives honors weight. We also have advanced placement or AP Latin courses that are taught at the high school, as well as International Baccalaureate or IB Latin courses that are taught at the high school. And finally, we have some community college Latin courses that are taught, particularly in our early colleges. And for that reason, I sometimes put K-13 classical language programs to indicate that our early college students are completing both their high school diploma and an associate's degree or getting credit at a community college level and actually graduate after 5 years, grade 13 if you will, with both degrees. When students take Latin courses at the community college level, there's some different things that happen, and I wanted to point this out to you by showing you the chart we have that looks at the Latin 1 through 6 courses, both with their Power School course code within our state system, as well as the Crosswalk Community College course names that align to each of those levels and their Power School course code in the system. So you see that student, regardless of where they're taking Latin in this case, can get credit levels 1 through 6. Now, one thing that's very important in our state standards is that we have some resources so that teachers can use the state standards to build a local curriculum. And so, again, we have all of these options, K through 12. And we also have what are called clarifying objectives by course. And these are documents that have our clarifying objectives by course outcomes. So those proficiency outcomes we saw on the slide before. We call those clarifying objectives by course outcomes COCO's documents for their acronym that they make. But they are used for curriculum writing. And so they would have only the standards and the clarifying objectives that go for a particular course. So if you're teaching, for example, Latin 1, you can go get the Latin 1 COCO document and use that to build a standards-based local curriculum. The clarifying objectives by course outcomes, or COCO's documents, always have the course codes that are used with each course so that you can make sure that that's clear in the student's information as well as your own as a teacher or administrator. And the COCO's documents page, which you see here as the direct link on the World Languages Wiki that has all these materials, they also include links to AP and IB materials. Obviously, those programs are conducted by organizations outside of our state, but of course, they still link into our state standards with proficiency outcomes. And the materials you would use for those particular curriculums are linked on our World Languages Wiki, just like the COCO's documents are for all of our courses from the state standards. Another resource for our K-12 classical language programs from the standards is the Administrator Guide. And I want you to go ahead and on your control panel, pull this up as a handout. On your control panel, you'll see a space just for handouts. There are 2 handouts for this particular webinar. And so this is the AGWL for Administrator Guide for World Languages Classical Language Programs. If you just click on that, it'll download as a PDF. It's also linked from this slide should you need it later. And our administrator guides are a really good tool. They were put together by our World Languages Collaborative team as a resource, particularly for administrators, just like it says, so that they would understand what each of our programs is about. They get an overview, including the structure of our World Language Essential Standards, or WLES, and the actual proficiency scale that we use to talk about the language skills. They also include research and testing results, sort of the benefits of studying a world language, including things like AP test results for the state, as well as the impact on academic achievement that we see world language programs having. On page 2, they have expectations and outcomes. So those proficiency outcomes that you just saw on the chart before are there, reprinted. There's also an expectations information about what to expect when you walk into a world language classroom. In this case, particularly into a classical language classroom, because most of our administrators who are observing us as teachers, unfortunately, did not come from a world language teaching background. And so we've developed these administrator guides to be kind of look-for documents. As to what an administrator would look for to make sure that a world language classroom, and particularly classical language classroom in this guide to make sure that they know what they're looking for and that they see best practices and recognize them when they see them for an observation. Finally, the second page of this, the feedback tool that goes with this, is aligned to our North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, or NCESA standards 1 through 5, that all of our teachers in public schools are evaluated on each year. You'll notice that these NCESA standards are also linked into the TEL project materials, the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning. And so this helps us, again, align to best practices in a world language classroom and use this administrator guide as a resource for building solid programs. So let's talk a little bit about where we are with K-12 classical language programs. What you see here is a screenshot showing our statewide enrollment in all of our languages. This has our most recently public release data from 2016-17, and you see there that Latin has statewide approximately 11,700 students enrolled. And then you see across the chart where that enrollment is coming from based on course codes and data collected statewide. Now you can download the World Languages in North Carolina document that you see there, the whole thing, by going to the bit.ly link, or it's also the second handout in our broadcast today. So if you pull that up, you can quickly see this information. Again, it displays as a PDF, and you should be able to download it to your computer. I always think it's good to know what our data says. We live in very much a data-driven society, and when people ask questions like, well, you know, how prevalent are different kinds of language programs? I think we should be able to answer those questions. And if you know what the statewide data is, then you can also use that information to inform your practices locally, whether that's with your district or your school or even your department. And so this is an overview of our enrollment overall. I do update this document annually. So as I said, this was with our latest publicly released information. It was published in February of this year, 2018. Now, if you want to look at, though, where these numbers come from, I do have a more detailed breakdown coming up on the screen. Here it shows you from those dots on the chart how many students, how many individual students are taking these courses, or at least took them in 2016-17 school year. So you can see that we do have a strong K-8 Latin program, although it's limited to a few districts and schools. We do have folks studying K-8 Latin. And then we have Latin 1 through 5 that we've had course code enrollment data. I would include 6 if we'd had course code enrollment data from that year for that level. And then also AP Latin and IB Latin. These numbers fluctuate over time, but what I can tell you in general about our statewide data is that we see more students taking more languages. And so our language enrollment is steady in each language. This year that we're looking at happened to have 11,666 students, so that's how we get rounded to 11,700. And you can also see those community college courses, as I noted before. When those are listed next to their equivalents of Latin 1 through 6, I've indicated in parentheses how many students were actually taking at the community college level out of that total number for the course. So you see we have a small enrollment at the community college level for Latin, but it's primarily in our high schools. Another thing for all of us to be aware of in world languages is our high school diploma endorsement, the Global Languages Endorsement. This is the North Carolina Seal of Biliteracy, and this can be earned in any language. And so I wanted to share with you the enrollment requirements. These are in the brochure you see pictured on the screen, which is linked, of course, so that you can get if you haven't already gotten a copy. For our Global Languages Endorsement, our Seal of Biliteracy, our students have to show that they are bilingual. They have to meet the requirements as it shows in the first bullet for the English Language Arts courses for English requirements. And then they have to establish proficiency in a world language of intermediate, low, or higher proficiency using one of the options you see listed there. I will tell you the middle one, the completing 4 levels of the same language with an unweighted 2.5 GPA or higher, is the most common. That simply requires students to complete level 4, 5, or 6, or AP or IB courses with the same GPA they would for the English courses. While that is the most common, students can also choose, as it says in the first option, to take an external exam that's on the NCDPI approved external assessment list, and again, achieving a minimum language proficiency score of IL or intermediate low. For Latin, the ALIRA from ACTFL is on there, and it is a test of reading Latin, but that is the one that is on the approved list for the Global Languages Endorsement. Finally, our students can use the credit by demonstrated mastery process to establish intermediate low proficiency using our proficiency based outcomes in the state standards. Also, if a student is an English learner, you see that last bullet outlines what they have to do for this from the English learner standpoint. This is our data coming up on the screen for our Global Languages Endorsement for the past 4 years of graduating seniors. Notice that each graduation year we had the list of the total number of Global Languages Endorsements, or GLEs, that were earned, then what percentage of graduates statewide that was who earned our Global Languages Endorsement, and then we have a breakdown of graduates from high schools in various districts and charter schools. Notice that the numbers vary quite a bit. The reason for the big jump in 2018 was that the process for evaluating students to see if they qualify for Global Languages Endorsement became automated in PowerSchool. And so that number of over 9,000 and 9% of our graduates is where we kind of always thought we would be. But when districts and schools had to enter the information manually, it was hard sometimes and it didn't always show up in our data. So things are looking good with our Global Languages Endorsement. And you'll notice I've outlined the fact that you can earn your Global Languages Endorsement, your seal by literacy in Latin. We are one of several states that offers that opportunity. Some states restrict the languages that Global Languages Endorsement can be earned in, but we recognize all languages equally, and they would all follow the same process as far as qualifying for that language. So we're in good shape that way. All right. Well, let's talk about which information about classical language programs was most interesting to you so far. Once again, I'll put the poll out there. Please go ahead and let us know which information that you just heard about classical language programs K-12 was most interesting to you. This is one where you have to pick just one. All right, let's take about 10 more seconds for our voting. Go ahead and get your choices in. All right, we're going to go ahead and finish up and close our poll and then share the results. It looks like everybody had something they were interested in. There were a lot of folks, almost a third, interested in our statewide enrollment data and trends, as well as our Global Languages Endorsement information. There was also a lot of interest in resources like the COCO documents for local curriculum planning, as well as the Administrator Guide. Some who were interested in our K-12 proficiency outcomes in the state standards, and about 10% who said that there was something else or more than one of the above was what they were interested in. I do see a quick question here that we need to address. This person said, so is it true that students and teachers do not have to do anything extra for our students who are in the 4th year of Latin in order for them to get the GLE, the Global Languages Endorsement? They just have to meet the grade requirements. That is true. And now remember that a Global Languages Endorsement sealed by literacy implies biliteracy. So they have to meet those GPA requirements both for the language they're studying, the world language they're studying, in this case Latin, as well as their English language arts required courses. But yes, the system now automatically checks, our PowerSchool system automatically checks to see which graduates qualify. And one nice thing about that is that it also checks to see how they qualify and takes the highest level of qualification. So if they complete the level 4 or higher course and that qualifies them, then that's automatically put on their transcript as, in this case, Latin and intermediate low proficiency. If they'd done something like take an external test, as well as taking the course, let's say, and they had achieved intermediate mid proficiency, it would actually check that off and make sure on their transcript it was entered as Latin intermediate mid proficiency. The same thing with our credit by demonstrated mastery or CDM process. So it looks to see what the qualifications are for every student and the highest level of qualification when it comes to proficiency of the world language. All right. Thank you for answering that question. We're going to go on now to our spotlight presentation where we're focusing on Guilford County Schools, and Kimberly Pilling, the Director of Global Languages, is here with us to share today on that.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I appreciate you inviting us to participate in this series, and I'm really happy to be here to brag about our fantastic Latin program here at Guilford County Schools. So we do have a very strong tradition of Latin instruction here at Guilford County. We do offer Latin K through 12. We begin at Murphy Traditional Academy, which is our K-5 school. We also offer Latin at Brown Summit Middle, and 7 of our high schools have Latin programs. Those are Dudley, Grimsley, High Point Central, Northwest, Page, Ragsdale, and Southwest. So like in our other classes, our students begin with the basics. They start by learning their Roman numerals, which a lot of us as adults don't quite have a handle on. I was able to do 1 through 10, but that's about my limit. Students at our elementary school at Murphy do a lot about Roman culture. They talk about history. They talk about English cognates. Nearly 3 in 5 English words come from the Latin. And if you want to have a good afternoon, I would recommend that you go visit Murphy and see our kindergarten kids taking their Latin classes. I was there a few weeks back, and our instructor, Mr. Bach, welcomed the kids, and he said to them, "Salve, salve," which is hello in Latin, and he kept saying it, and he asked the kids, "So what does salve mean in Latin?" And they all said, "It means hello." And he said, "Very good. Does anyone remember how to say goodbye in Latin?" And one of the little gals yelled out, "Hola," which made both of us laugh. But this is where they start in kindergarten, and they take Latin through K-5. And then they have the option of middle school Latin. Just to tell you a little bit history about how it started, in 1998, 3 of our teachers went to DC and Philadelphia. They studied the programs that were there, and then they created a curriculum here at Guilford County Schools. And the very next year, we began our program at Murphy Traditional, which is one of the few elementary schools in the state to offer Latin. Interestingly enough, one of those 3 teachers is the Venerable Temple Eller, who is with us still, and we're thrilled to have her. She is one of our 2 Latin teachers at Grimsley High School. And so she has been instrumental in not only beginning this program, but keeping it really strong in Guilford County. This is a couple pictures of our 6th grade Latin class at Brown Summit Middle. And I've had the opportunity to visit that class. You can see the 6th graders are engaged in a great project that they were doing with their teacher, Jessica Runtz. And I was able to circulate and speak to some of the kids. They are thrilled about Latin. They love the class. A lot of them said so because they like the teacher. But one young man mentioned to me that he's really interested in languages and traveling, and so his father thought he should take Latin, since it's the root of so many other languages. And that was really exciting to see these youngsters be excited about Latin and to see the many, many benefits there are of taking not just a foreign language, but specifically Latin in this case. Over the years, our schools from Guilford County have participated in the state and national junior classical league. They've gone to conventions in Chapel Hill. Grimsley and Northwest have very strong AP Latin programs. Grimsley, Page, and High Point Central offer IB Latin. And Anne-Marie, thanks for doing some research on this. We were able to confirm that Grimsley High School is the only school in the state that offers both AP and IB Latin classes for our kids. And I wanted to just make a graphic to show you enrollment. I think that probably our heyday for Latin was in the early 2000s. In 2003, all but one of our high schools offered Latin. But over the past 5 years, our enrollment has done quite well. Brown Summit Middle has remained pretty much the same. That has more to do with their student population. Enrollment at Dudley and Northwest have actually gone up. Southwest is doing pretty well. And Grimsley, Page, and Ragsdale are down a little from 2013. But if you look at their data over the past 3 years, they have really maintained and have strong participation in their Latin programs. So the only one we're a little worried about is High Point Central. Obviously, that's a drop that we would like to eliminate. And I think credit has to go to the strong teachers who we have had in our Latin programs, as well as great administrative support. Our principal at Murphy Elementary, for example, is really committed to maintaining the Latin program there, and several of our administrators have been very supportive of our programs. So here we have our poll question. What was most interesting to you? And I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and I'll be happy to answer. Or I might just have Jennifer, our next presenter, answer, because she's one of our group of fantastic Latin teachers here in Guilford County.
All right, our poll question's up. Please share which information about Guilford County Schools classical languages programs was most interesting to you. Once again, you can choose just one or the other more than one at the bottom. I always like it when we're doing these broadcasts, especially since we're setting them up as virtual school site visits, that we mention our teachers who work so hard to build their programs. As she noted, Temple Eller is on the line with us today, as is Jennifer Kunka, and others that you saw in the pictures there from Guilford County Schools. All right, let's take about 10 seconds and finish up our voting on the poll. One thing that's coming in from our question box right now is the fact that in Latin and classical languages, as well as in modern languages, many of our teachers who love teaching teach face-to-face, as you're seeing here in Guilford County Schools, as well as online through the North Carolina Virtual Public School, or NCvps. We'll probably hear a little bit more about that as we move on, but I wanted you to be aware of that as an opportunity for building language teaching skills, as well as reaching out to new student groups. All right, let's take a look at our poll results. The response that got the most interest was the fluctuations in Latin enrollment. And those are interesting. Certainly as we were putting this presentation together, I spoke with several people and noted the fact that our statewide enrollment, which as I said is steady, usually in each language and sometimes growing a little bit, is also reflected in fluctuations from year to year, as well as from program to program. And you saw that, I think, in Guilford County Schools Latin enrollments. We also have people who were very intrigued by the unique aspects of classical language programs in general in Guilford County Schools. Some who like the K-12 sequence involving 9 different schools across the district, as well as some who are intrigued by the Murphy Traditional Academy history. That is one of our few elementary Latin programs in the state. And some of you were liked more than one of those responses. So thank you, Kimberly, for sharing your programs with us today. We appreciate learning more about them. Let's move on now to NCvps, or North Carolina Virtual Public School, where we have Jen Kunka and Chad Tim to talk with us about their programs. We're going to have a little bit of delay. As I said, sometimes when we're switching on the technology, it takes them a moment to unmute themselves so that they can talk.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, this is Jen Kunka, and I'm here presenting with Chad Tim. One of the first things that I should probably note is that I am here in Greensboro, and yes, I also do teach in Guilford County. And Chad lives in San Diego, but he is a North Carolina licensed Latin instructor. So that's one of the kind of fun things about the virtual school, is that we have teachers from all over, many of whom live in North Carolina and different counties across the state, but also folks like Chad who live elsewhere, and he has been able to do some amazing travel and integrate that into his courses as well. So Chad, I don't know, are you able to talk as well?
Sure, I'll chime in when we get to the Latin 3, Jen.
Okay, cool. All right, so am I able to progress the slides? I'm sorry, I should have checked this, but okay. So just to give a quick history of Latin with the North Carolina Virtual Public School, Latin started in the late 90s with Cumberland County Schools, we believe it was 96 or 97, creating a web academy out of 71st High School using the Cambridge Latin textbook. And I'm going to go ahead and shout out Richard Cartwright, who still teaches with us today, was that teacher with 71st High School doing the web academy at that time. And they used the Cambridge textbook, and he said that basically he made a web page using, I think he said front page, and the students would view it, and then they would email him assignments. At the same time, Learn NC began offering Latin courses, and there was another North Carolina teacher named Tom Sears, who was the teacher with that program. And for a while, these smaller programs kind of existed separate from one another, and then in the early 2000s, they began to combine. And sometime around 2007, North Carolina ended up creating the North Carolina Virtual Public School and folded these smaller schools, the Web Academy and Learn NC, into one program, which for us was our One Latin program. And as I said, Richard still teaches with us today, so he's, you know, been at the very forefront of online education in North Carolina, which I think is amazing. Our Latin program is huge. I should have corrected this number. Actually, we have more than 350 students. We have, I didn't get this number fixed, but we fill the gaps for the entire state, as Chad stated here. There are counties where, you know, school systems on the Outer Banks where they may have 1 or 2 students who are interested in learning more about 1 or 2 students who are interested. No, it's not your fault, Chad. I'm the one who said we were done. But anyway, 1 or 2 students at a school on the Outer Banks who want to learn Latin, and it's hard to employ a Latin teacher for that. And in addition, there just aren't enough of us Latin teachers to go around to every school in the state. So NCbps really fills the gaps for those 1 or 2 students who might live in Manio, and those 1 or 2 students who might live in Murphy, and all of the hundreds in between, to be able to take Latin even if it's not offered at their school. Also, sometimes it is offered at their school, but they just can't make Latin fit in their schedule. So NCbps also allows those students to still take Latin and continue their Latin studies. We currently have 14 active teachers, and like I said, many of us live in North Carolina, but a few of us don't, like Chad. And actually, when we say over 350 students, that's in Latin 1. This semester, we have about 450 students in Latin 1. We have about 200 students in Latin 2. And I found something like 68 students in Latin 3. We currently don't offer AP with NCbps, though one of our long-term goals is to make that happen. But right now, we offer levels 1 through 3. And so if I can, perfect. Thank you. I'm not sure who's advancing, but you're great. So Latin 1, we try to align our programs with what we know is being taught in schools around the state. So that if someone is popping in to our course from a school where Latin is taught, but they are just trying to make it fit in their schedule, but then they might pop back into their class with their regular face-to-face teacher for Latin 3. Let's say they take Latin 1 face-to-face, Latin 2 with us, Latin 3 face-to-face again. We want them to be able to integrate that. So since we have lots of Latin teachers from around the state bringing all this information together, we know what's commonly taught in Latin 1 and what's commonly taught in Latin 2 according to the standards, and then just kind of what we're, okay, thank you. Sorry, but what's commonly taught in Latin 1, 2, and 3, state to state. And so in Latin 1, we students learn the basics of Latin grammar, They read stories that were written by our own NCbps teachers, so we no longer use any one textbook. We've created our own course. And we focus in Latin 1 on Roman culture. And that's things like who spoke Latin, what countries encompassed the Empire of Rome, Roman daily life and art and architecture and all of these mythology, all of these facets of ancient Rome and ancient culture that have affected us today in the modern day. In Latin 2, we actually build upon that Latin 1 knowledge. The grammar gets more complex. In Latin 1, they're learning basic verbs in the active voice, as in John is jumping. In Latin 2, we switch into the passive voice, which is taking those verbs and making them different. Rather than, John is eating bread, the bread is now being eaten by John. That's passive voice. We learn more uses of the nouns. We learn participles. We learn the subjunctive mood. The grammar just, in Latin 2, is the beefiest, and it is, honestly, at any school across the state. The grammar in Latin 2 is very beefy. And then we continue to read our own, we've created our own Latin program, our own textbook, if you will, of teacher-written stories about key periods of Roman history. So in Latin 1, we focus more on culture. Latin 2, we focus more on the history and the historical significance of things that happened in ancient times. And we're going to shift into Latin 3, and Chad's going to take over.
Thanks, Jen. Wonderful presentation of Latin 1 and 2 and the history. Some things I didn't know in there. I've been with NCbps since 2010. Absolutely love being here, contributing to the courses and trying to keep the program current is one of our goals. I would say that Latin 3 is probably our most recently revised course. It was, for a while, kind of a standalone thing, but it was recently revised to become more of a stepping stone or a bridge to AP, which hopefully we'll get it back soon. It's not easy to find teachers who are AP certified, good curriculum writers, and also have the time and energy to contribute to creating a brand new textbook-free AP Latin course. So it's a process that hopefully we can continue to move forward and get AP back on the offerings. But as Latin 3 stands now, it is a great bridge to AP. We finish up some of the complex grammar that Latin 1 and 2 don't get to. The weird things like, I'm sure there's a lot of classicists in here, the gerunds and some of the more obscure subjunctive forms. But then pretty quickly the real Latin begins, and the students finally get to step into that time machine, and they start to get to commune with culture and minds that are over 2,000 years old. So it's really exciting that they finally get to read this real Latin. And the first thing that we throw at him is Catullus, which he writes about crazy love. He was already a little bit crazy, and then he met someone who was even crazier, and they drove each other crazy. And so it's a little bit of ancient Jerry Springer. And I think it's, love is a timeless topic, and I think it's very relevant, especially for our adolescent audience who are all experiencing some of these things in very intense ways for the first time in their lives. So I think that hits home. After some Catullus, then we turn to the poet Ovid, and we get to take a look at some of his mythology in the Metamorphoses. And it's kind of like the Edith Hamilton primary source. A lot of students have read the Edith Hamilton sort of summary and retelling of classical mythology, and one of her primary sources for all of those stories is Ovid. So that's another great great way for the students to get excited about the subject matter. A lot of them, mythology is their favorite part. We also read a couple of selections from one of Ovid's more obscure works called the Tristia, which literally means sad stuff. And this is where Ovid deals with his exile from Rome and society. He was ostracized for somewhat mysterious reasons, forced to live thousands of miles from Rome and all his friends and family. And so he opines about his intense loss, and that is another, sort of universal theme that anyone can identify with. After some Ovid, then the students get to Caesar, and this is where the kind of bridge to AP takes place, because Caesar is now one of the authors on the AP exam. And this is, Caesar is a kind of a love-hate relationship for a lot of students. Of course, I love Caesar. I think it's really exciting and unique that he's sort of this larger-than-life figure. Everyone's heard the name. Not everyone is aware that that he wrote his own sort of autobiographical account of his military and political conquests. And in the Latin 3 course, they get to read about his conquest of Gaul, which is modern-day France, and he added pretty much the entirety of it to Rome's borders. He also touched down in Germany and even made it across the Channel and made landfall in Britain. So he was instrumental in increasing Rome's borders and power. This is all before he became dictator. And then, of course, the famous Et tu, Brute, that ended his illustrious career. But students get to read his firsthand account of all these exploits, which weirdly were written in the third person. He always Caesar talks about Caesar in the third person. And so that's kind of where the course ends, and that's where a typical AP course would probably start up, reviewing some of those same texts and passages, and better prepare the students for the types of essays and test questions that they're going to see on the AP exam. So that's what we have for you as far as Latin 3 goes.
And we do have a comment from Ellen Hart, who's online with us today. She works with NCbps as well, and she says she wanted to remind everyone that they always need more AP Latin course revisers to help with the work of getting AP Latin back available through NCbps.
Yeah, real quick, I would love to second that plea. Ellen, thank you for making that comment. We may have some people who are qualified here in this room. You would be doing all of the students in North Carolina, present and future generations, a great favor if you could help us get AP back on our offerings. Thank you.
Are we back to me? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I would like to third that. We really are looking for, as Chad worded it so well, it is hard to find a teacher who is very good at teaching AP who also has the time and the ability to help us to craft an online course that will knock out those AP skills for our students. So that's something we're working back towards doing. So I just kind of, I'm just circling into how we cover this material. Of course, we have our Latin 1, 2, and 3 courses that our teachers actually help to create. And then in addition to that, all of our teachers put their own spin on their classes with supplementary materials that they've each created. All of us create our own videos, our own graphics, our own supplementary study items. I record myself singing ending songs and send them to my students. It's very embarrassing, but it has to happen. And we post those. Sometimes we send them through messages, but we also post them in daily announcements that we send out to our students in our courses. And then every week, very much like this webinar, each teacher offers a live class for their students. And those live classes are open to any Latin 1 student if you're a Latin 1 teacher, or any Latin 2 student if you're a Latin 2 teacher. And our goal is to try to offer so many times that the majority of our students can attend one of those sessions live and have their questions answered. But just like this session today, we do record them, and our students do also watch the recording. And that is a requirement because there's so much that just can't be covered with just videos and announcements in a course. Sometimes you just need to be able to hear a question and answer it on the fly. We also are available by text, phone, and email. Very different from a face-to-face teacher. We're available pretty much 24/7. Many of us will post office hours, but we're going to respond to a student when they text us. And if I wake up, now granted, if I wake up at 3 a.m. and I have a text from a student, I'm going to wait until the morning to respond so I don't wake them up with my response. But emails, I certainly will send back if I wake up in the middle of the night and I have one. And our teachers are all doing that. Oftentimes I have found that I know my online students, the ones who are very communicative, I know them better than my face-to-face students because some of these students who like to take online courses they're self-motivated, and they're maybe a little bit quieter or shyer in a face-to-face class, but online they're more comfortable sharing in an environment where they're not having to look at their teacher. And so they share information with me, or they'll send me questions directly, and they get used to doing that. And I think we've all, as online teachers, found that. And then kind of moving in to our last little bit of information about NCbps. This actually is our whole world language department, not just the Latin department, but we offer something called the Culture Cafe, and it's unique to NCbps, and I think it's so cool. Our world language teachers and staff members will come up with any topic that interests us. Like I'm still trying to get something together on myth monsters for next week for Halloween. I'm just not sure if I'm going to get it together as I have some other things going on. But you can see here next week we have something going on. One of our Japanese teachers is doing a session on spooky Japan for the Halloween week. And we have tons of sessions coming up. Within the next week, we have becoming a sign language interpreter, Japanese being a radio DJ in Japan, and we also have Spooky Japan. That's just next week. We'll have Spanish-related topics. We'll have French-related topics. We offer Arabic, Japanese, Hebrew, German, Latin. All of these different subjects offer Culture Cafe sessions throughout the year. And now we've actually had some of our other areas, math and science, and then even some college prep sessions are starting to add cafe sessions into our Culture Cafe. So this is a really cool, unique thing to NCbps, but it's available. I bolded this on the slide because anybody can attend. Students, parents, the public, anybody may attend. And I've put the website for the Culture Cafe here in the slides so that if this is something that's interesting to you, you can save it and bookmark it and check back. And if something looks cool, please come. It's really, it's just whatever's interesting to the teacher, which we, in this day and age with so much testing and so much curriculum kind of provided to us, it's kind of nice to just say, hey, I'm really interested in this topic, and that's what I'm going to present about, and it's not something that I could normally present in my classroom. And so that's the Culture Cafe with NCbps, and that's the conclusion of what I had planned to say, but of course, if anyone has questions, please let me know, or chat.
And she is correct. Culture Cafe is for everyone, and it's even gone beyond world languages because it was such a good example of how to connect with literally anyone, students, parents, the public, and learn a little bit more about a cultural topic, a career topic, or anything else. So with that, we're going to go ahead and do one last poll to see what was most interesting to you about the NCbps Classical Languages programs that were presented. Please go ahead and vote. And I will also be checking for questions as we go. All right, we're getting quick at voting. We're going to go ahead and close this out and then share the results. As you can see, there's a lot of interest in the Culture Cafe sessions and what's available from NCbps in that regard. There's also a lot of interest in the fact that NCbps makes Latin available to all of our North Carolina students, whether they can have a face-to-face teacher or not, as well as appreciating some insight into how students engage with teachers through text and video, as well as how our history in North Carolina and offering online learning has impacted students. Along with that, they were very interested in knowing about self-motivated learning, particularly with our students, and how that works in an online environment. Thank you for your responses. We're going to go ahead now to Caroline Kelly, who's here to tell us about classical language professional organizations.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, for the way you support all languages and all kinds of schools. I really appreciate it, and interesting to see that there are several people taking Latin at community colleges as well, and it's a great option. If you want to go to the next slide, we will Yeah. Isn't it terrific? The new incoming president for ACL is our very own Mary Pendergraft from Wake Forest. And we know how wonderful she's been to support languages, classical languages here in the state at the K-12 level. And now she's going to be our president for the entire country. So we're very, very fortunate. And it's a particularly exciting year because we're in our centennial year. One of the things, which I'll come to in just a minute, one of the things that I want to remind you is to sign up for the National Latin exam. The deadline's not till the 22nd of January next year. However, if you, the way it works is if you send your registration in early, then according to when it's sent in is when your results are sent out. Now they're pretty quick now, so it doesn't make that much difference, but it's still nice to get your results pretty quickly after the exam. So that's something to remember. And also a reminder that you do have to be an ACL member to give the exam. And there may be some questions on that. If they come in there, I'd be happy to answer them. And there's one new thing now. Sometimes it's been difficult for people to offer the National Latin exam at school because you had to get somebody else to administer the exam. There are still the safety features in place, namely that the exams have to stay unopened and everything until the actual time of the exam. But you are allowed to give the exam in your classroom now and be the proctor so that you don't have to worry about trying to find another proctor. So that's a nice addition. And of course, you can do it online as well as with paper. So those are several options, some of them new. And then the next thing, the next slide, yes, reminds us that the Summer Institute run by ACL varies from place to place all over the country. But we decided that for the centennial celebration that we would like to have it in New York City. Now everybody goes, yeah, I want to go to New York, and then you go, oh heavens, can I possibly afford it? Well, the answer is yes, because one of the things that's happening along with celebration is a fundraising effort, and so it's going to be less expensive than usual as far as registration, and we're going to be able to get rooms at one of the universities. My mind's gone blank. I think it's New York University, that are under $100. So if you're going to be staying in a dorm room, it's going to be under $100 to stay in New York. So that's not bad. And then we'll be staying at a Hilton in Midtown Manhattan. And again, it's very reasonable. So keep an eye open for that and plan to come, because the goal is to have a really terrific celebration. We hope we'll see a lot of North Carolina people there. Now, I think the next slide is just a reminder about JCL and a reminder that NCJCL Fall Forum is coming up in a couple of weeks. Again, this is a wonderful organization. If your students don't belong, my recommendation is go along on the 10th with 4 or 5 students just to get a sense of what's happening, and then maybe plan to go in the spring to the big convention, which is always just such a learning experience. And my students and their parents, interestingly, just absolutely love it. So it's a great event, and we've got some very wonderful people who work really hard to make it happen. And again, in order to take your students to NCJCL, you need to be an ACL member. So that's the ACL report for today. I'm through with that. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, and we need that too, yes.
Yes, and in addition to ACL, which is, of course, the national organization for classical language teachers, we have a North Carolina chapter, which is our North Carolina Classical Association here in the state. NCCA is an allied organization with FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, and that means that they offer a Latin pedagogy panel at the FLANC Fall Conference each year and other opportunities specifically for Latin teachers to network. They do also have an annual spring Saturday conference that will be advertised on our listservs here, and of course advertised through their members, that offers CEUs and a lot of resources for teachers and instructors. So you see all the connection information, and once again, the links you see on these slides will be available afterwards so that you can access all of these materials quickly and easily. Well, that's it for professional organizations. So thank you, Caroline. And we did not put in a last poll question. We knew we might be running close to our time. We are so glad you joined us, and we thank all of our presenters today for sharing their perspective on classical language programs across our state that serve our North Carolina students. We have quite an incredible Latin team, if you will, as well as ancient Greek and other classical language programs. We'll finish today with just some reminders about subscribing to our DPI listserv for world languages. This is information available for you. We have 3 listservs that are probably of interest to classical language teachers: NC Linguafolio, World Language Instructors, which is K-20, and the World Language Education News, which is available for all, whether you're an educator or a parent or another kind of policymaker. When you sign up for the World Language Instructors newsletter, you can also specify classical languages if you would like, so that you get some targeted message that come out just for this particular program. We do also want to remind you about the other webinars in this series, as well as the whole World Language webinar series. We have 3 different groups of webinars. You see that we've completed 2. Today we've completed the first one for the Essential Standards K-12 Program Showcase series. Our next one in this series will be on February 20th in the new year, and it will focus on dual and heritage languages. Our next webinar coming up, though, is November 28th. It is our DPI World Language Quarterly Updates series. Anyone is welcome to join and hear information locally, statewide, regionally, or nationally that's happening for world languages. And then we'll be starting a new series this year, which will launch on December 5th, which is about measuring world language proficiency, basically how you assess proficiency for our standards in the classroom. So please tune in. Those World Language webinar series are always on Wednesdays. I like to refer to them as World Language Wednesdays, and always from 4 to 5 p.m. So they're after the school day has ended, hopefully for our teachers. That's it for final questions. I'm looking to see if there are any. Please put any in that you have for me or any of our speakers today. As I'm waiting for questions, I want to remind everyone that these materials will be posted on our World Languages Wiki on the webinar series information page where it was first advertised. You'll be able to have the Google Slides as well as those slides in PowerPoint and PDF format, so you could easily use them for your local presentations if you would like. There'll also be a recording of this webinar posted on the World Languages playlist on the NCDPI YouTube channel, and then we'll have our handouts there as well. Please be aware also, some of you may already know, the World Languages Wiki is moving to a new home. Wiki Spaces, where it's currently housed, is going out of business, so we will have a new Google site sometime during this school year, where all of our content and materials for our World Language Essential Standards and our World Language programs will be housed. So look for that to happen soon. All right, I'm looking around for questions. I don't see any right now. So if you have no questions, you are welcome to bid us adieu and have a wonderful evening. I will go ahead and stop the recording so the system can start processing it, but know that we are always still here to answer any questions you have.